maybe we don't have all the answers right now, but is it something that we could look at based on the merits that Mr. Morgan is talking about? Mr. McDonald and Mr. Shaw.
Well, my only suggestion would be there's only so much that council's accountable for as elected officials. The theory, of course, is that the citizens elected you, and if they don't like what you're doing, you're not going to get reelected. And so a complaint against a council member, if it is something that would be cause for removal under our charter, would be something that, obviously should be looked at, taken seriously. Or if it was something else that was a direct violation that had some sort of ramifications. Right now, we just simply say a complaint, which could be, I don't like the color of that council member's shirt, for all we know. I mean, I'm being silly, of course, but there's, the only thing I could think of, because as you said, we want to give people the opportunity to raise issues if they have it, and we want all council to be aware of those issues if they're there. But perhaps if you're looking to try to avoid the I'm just looking for attention type of complaint, perhaps some kind of rule that specifically says what the complaint has to be about. It has to be about this section or this or something not so open-ended is about all I can think of.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, would you be opposed to looking at that particular rules of council section regarding the complaints and maybe come up with a revision or something that might be satisfactory to you that we could then talk about and discuss and air out that way? Because right now, I mean, it's something we can talk about without seeing anything that's written or something new. I'm not sure there's a whole lot to talk about other than just the topic itself right now.
Well, I think my goal tonight, Mayor, was just to tee it up. Okay. But I think one option might also, if Mr. McDonald agreed, would be to look at individual complainants and after a track record of no findings from the complaint, say, I don't know, Mayor, how we would do this given what you just stated, but we may read that complaint, but we're not going to do a formal investigation on it. I think Mr. McDonald would agree, but I'm not the attorney, that there are other avenues for any resident to pursue to ensure that certain binding documents, whether it's the Constitution of the United States or the laws of Ohio or even our own charter, are applied to us. In other words, I don't think this council is, matter of fact, I'm quite confident, this council is not the final authority on itself. There are higher venues of government to appeal to, I believe, if that resident so desired. So the point being, where we have someone who is, hard for me to know motive, but presumably seeking attention, as Mr. McDonald put it, and is filing multiple complaints that the council has to then follow up on, that requires staff time, that distracts from the other 39,999 people, to kind of use the vernacular's mission. I think that's something worthy of us to consider and look at, and I would be even in favor of putting a limit on the number of those that we receive that go unfounded. If there's a finding and a complaint, then I think all that resident has done is actually all of us a great service and favor, right? So I think that might be another option that this council could consider. I've done it before. I'm happy to bring something back to the council. I did not do that somewhat intentionally tonight. It was more of a discussion starter. So I'll leave it to you, Mayor, to help figure out where it goes next. Okay.
Mr. McDonald, do you have any other comment?
No, my thought would be in determining an unfounded complaint, we would probably want to have that done by, if not all of council, a definite supermajority of council, because we don't want to have the appearance that every time an advocate for, say, a particular council member files a complaint, it's always unfounded because a majority of people may disagree with that person. So I fully agree that there could be something in there about the laws, the vexatious litigator. I can't remember exactly how to say that, but somebody who keeps filing complaints all the time, the court will say, you're done because you keep filing these. But I would think that, again, for transparency reasons and stuff like that, that finding that a complaint is unfounded should have a pretty large majority of count, not just a simple majority saying this is unfounded or a single person saying this is unfounded, but perhaps all of council or 2/3 of council or 3/4 or some higher number.
Mrs. Birch?
Jerry, is there any case law that you know of that might help us address what might be termed frivolous lawsuits versus trying to keep someone from filing for whatever reason? How do you define what we might term as frivolous? Maybe that's not the right word, but...
Right. There is. I can't say for our rules of counsel. And the reason a frivolous lawsuit is a lawsuit that has no basis in the law. They're saying you should be arrested because your house is yellow. Well, there's nothing anywhere in the law that says you can't have a yellow house. So that is a frivolous type of suit because there's no basis. Now, with our counsel rules, we don't really have anything at all. We just say complaints can be filed. We don't say what they're about or anything. So that's why in my mind, I was thinking of somehow defining better what the complaints are, complaints that are a violation of the charter, violation of the rules, or something a little bit more specific. And then if a complaint comes in that has nothing to do with that, then that could be something that we would say is frivolous complaint.
Well, haven't some of the complaints we've seen, couldn't they fall under the definition of frivolous?
Some could, some that you think might, maybe not.
Right. So it would be of no benefit to try to define.
Oh, I think we just, I agree. I just think if we have a group of 9 people all look at something and say this is a bunch of malarkey, then it is. Yeah. And if anybody says, well, I can kind of see it, then they vote no, and then that doesn't, if you will, count against them, assuming that's the way we go.
But then if the person who files that doesn't agree with the 9 of us,
they'll file a complaint.
Then they take it to a higher power? Is that what it is? Or?
Presumably, yes. I mean, again, we're dealing with our own internal rules. So if someone believes that there is a charter violation or that council member or members have done something that they're not supposed to do, there's the ability to take what's called a taxpayer action, which is a procedure through the court. We just happen to have our own internal procedure to deal with these, and people are rightfully taking advantage of that.
Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would ask through you that maybe our clerk of council reach out to some of the area clerks through his Master Clerk Association to see what some of the other communities do with complaints. Maybe get some feedback from some of our first-tier suburb members. I can guarantee you that we are not the only community that has a frivolous litigator in their realms of complaint issues. But I'd be interested to see how other communities deal with it. I know of one community on how they deal with it, but I'm not going to sit here and air that out here tonight.
Sure.
But
I would appreciate knowing that as well.
So, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other? Yes. Mr. Otto?
I don't know who even asked this question to, but have we had an inordinate amount of complaints recently that I'm unaware of? I can only think of 2 in recent history. Well, 1, maybe 2. One very recent that was handled by Mr. Morgan, and then the one non-complaint against me. Other than that, I can't think of any other complaints I've seen recently to bring this topic up. I don't know. I was just curious if there have been more than that I'm just unfamiliar with.
Well, since the changes to the rules of council in March, where it was added that all councils notified of any complaint, you've received notification of the one that's existed since March. Other than that, I don't have any data on that to share.
All right, thank you.
Could be a preventative measure, just as well as anything else.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to piggyback off on what Glenn just said, I do remember a complaint that Glenn had filed against then Vice Mayor Tracy Dudley. So that might be one more.
How many years ago?
Through the mayor, the comment that the way he handled the last complaint was, in my estimation, just absolutely wonderful. I thought he did a class act representing you, representing this council. when I read his final report. I thought from the very beginning the vice mayor had handled it with extreme professionalism. And if
Representing
he's
who?
interested in looking at this, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'd be all interested into looking at something that we can possibly do. I did like Jerry's comments about maybe outlining exactly what the complaints would be, and they'd have to be of the serious nature that's for removable offenses, potentially, if we can limit that. Again, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I certainly would entertain the idea of any possible way based on the recommendation of the vice mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. I think, as any of you, if you bring items to me for discussion, if they hold merit, and I agree, we can discuss them. If you, three of you compel me to put some, two of you compel me to put something on the agenda, we do that. I agree there was a good discussion, being that Mr. Morgan is the one who handled the last complaint that came through and obviously spent quite a bit of time. You know, $1,000 might not seem like a lot of money, but it was still $1,000 of legal fees to get all the information from. So I think it's a worthwhile discussion, at least, regardless of what the motive is, and I think it might even be a preventative measure. So, Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, a couple comments, then I'll make a suggestion to you, and perhaps the council will agree. One, Mr. Otto, I hear you. I think in that particular case, my understanding is there have been multiple complaints, maybe not in a short period of time, but over a period of time, and what I've been led to believe is they're all coming back unfounded. I think the $1,000 is important to most people, including myself in our community, but that's probably a lesser concern to me than the drama it creates, frankly, on this council. And the distraction it creates for everyone involved when there's really important things that we need to do, including some of the steps we took last meeting relative to redeveloping portions of Huber Heights and hopefully our core soon. So allow me to suggest that perhaps if the council's pleasure, I just get with Mr. McDonald and see what we can come up with in the way of a specific recommendation for you all to consider. And I'll bring that back at some appropriate time. I don't think there's a rush on this,
Sure.
But it's one more opportunity, I think, for us to kind of tighten up, clean up, try to, while giving the opportunity to not miss opportunities to hold ourselves accountable, maybe to a greater standard even of the 40,000 people who really need active representation, that most of which we don't hear from, but that live in this community, pay taxes in this community, are in this community on a regular basis and are looking for this community to grow, or they will quietly leave. And those are the ones that I perhaps am most concerned about, not that I'm not concerned about all, but that we not miss their somewhat silent voice that I think we're all required by our oaths to pay attention to, and letting a few who may have not just ground for their actions dominate the conversation by being loud, I think is a disservice to our community, and I'd like to see it stopped.
Okay, so I would, without any objection from council, to allow Mr. Morgan to get with Mr. McDonald and come up with something for us to consider. Mr. Shaw?
Mr. Mayor, I think, kind of to Mr. Otto's point, if we can, over the past 44 months, not talking about past council members who resigned, but in the past 44 months, if we list out those complaints and who they were from and things of that nature, I think to Mr. Morgan's point, we can put that timeline together. And we may be able to get to, as Mr. McDonald stated, that fictitious complainant, litigator, things of that nature.
Interesting.
Any objections from council to allow Mr. Morgan to work with Mr. McDonald?
Good idea,
Something
Mr.
forward for us
Shaw.
to consider? Okay. Mr. Morgan, Mr. McDonald, if you do that, whichever work session, however long it takes, and again, this is just an item of discussion. Any other questions, comments? Anything council like to report out?
All right, so that was a interesting conversation, don't you think? A lot of questions that I have. A lot of questions like, where did this all come from? It feels like it just came out of nowhere. And